The phone rang at 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was already up. Toronto winters do that to you, standing in my kitchen with the lights still low, warming my hands around a mug while snow drifted past the window like ash. My second coffee of the morning had gone lukewarm. I remember noticing that, oddly enough, right before everything changed. Glenn flashed on my screen. We hadn't talked in almost 3 weeks. Not since that last ugly visit to Mom's nursing home, where every sentence felt like it had barbs hidden inside it. I answered anyway. Douglas, Glenn said. His voice had that rehearsed, careful softness like someone reading a eulogy they didn't write. It instantly tightened my stomach. I've got difficult news. I gripped the phone harder. What is it? Mom passed away last night, he said, peacefully, in her sleep. My mug hovered an inch above the counter before I set it down, too fast. Coffee sloshed over the rim. What? My mouth felt dry. When did this happen? I was going to see her today. The funeral is Friday, Glenn continued, not answering my question. The gentleness dropped. His voice sharpened into something brisk and administrative. I've already taken care of everything. I swallowed. My heart was knocking against my ribs. And, Douglas, about the estate. A pause. That wasn't grief. It was satisfaction. The will is straightforward. Everything goes to me. The house, the cottage in Muskoka, the investments, all of it. I couldn't speak for a second. You get nothing, he added. And don't start any nonsense about contesting it. Then the line went dead. I stood there staring at the blank screen, feeling as if the kitchen had tilted. My mother was gone supposedly, and Glenn's first instinct wasn't to comfort me, or even to confirm details. It was to warn me off his money. Not our mother. His assets. Something didn't fit. Not emotionally. Not logically. Not with the brother I'd known, even after we'd grown apart. So I did what 40 years of engineering taught me to do when a structure looks wrong. I checked the supports. My name is Douglas Harrison. I'm 64, retired civil engineering, mostly municipal infrastructure projects across Ontario. Bridges, water mains, transit upgrades. The kind of work nobody notices until it fails. My wife, Catherine, died 3 years ago after a long fight with cancer. That sentence still feels like a cracked tooth in my mouth. We had one daughter, Emma, 28 now, a marine biologist on the west coast, Vancouver. A life of tide pools and research vessels, worlds away from my quiet Toronto routines. After Catherine passed, I didn't handle silence well. I filled it with volunteer work, community boards, and more than anything, time with Mom. Helen Harrison, 85 years old, retired teacher, sharp-tongued when she needed to be, kind when she didn't, the kind of woman who could beat you at Scrabble, and then insist you take leftovers home because you looked too skinny. Even at 84, she could quote poetry from memory and correct your grammar without sounding cruel. She lived alone in her place in Richmond Hill for years, refusing help with a pride that was almost athletic. Glenn, my younger brother by 4 years, was always different, charming, smooth, good at making people feel like they were his favorite person in the room. He became a real estate agent, married Patricia, had 2 kids. From the outside, his life looked polished. But over the years, you notice patterns. Glenn was always chasing the next big deal, always one closing away from fixing everything. There were murmurs at family dinners, investments that collapsed, commissions that didn't come through, Patricia picking up extra nursing shifts, Glenn laughing it off with that grin that said don't worry, I've got it . And then 9 months ago he started inserting himself into Mom's life with unusual urgency. He told her she needed support, that it was just practical, that paperwork had to be streamlined. He suggested he become her power of attorney. Mom hesitated. She didn't like handing anyone the keys to her independence, but Glenn worked on her the way he worked on clients, patient, persuasive, framing it as love. He's my baby boy, she'd said to me with a small smile. Like that explained everything. And that's when everything broke. Within weeks of Glenn getting PI, Mom was abruptly diagnosed with severe dementia, not gradual forgetfulness, not mild cognitive changes, severe, dramatic, like a switch flipped overnight. Glenn moved her into Maple Grove Care Center, insisting she couldn't live alone anymore. He called it a safety decision, a doctor's recommendation. The first time I visited after the move, I barely recognized her, not because she looked older, but because she looked absent. My mother, who once lectured a neighbor for parking too close to her driveway, sat in a chair by the window, hands limp in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. She didn't say my name. She didn't ask about Emma. She didn't correct my posture or tell me to take my coat off. Indoors, she stared through me. I cornered her doctor. In the hallway afterward, Dr. James Whitmore, a composed man with tidy hair and a voice that never changed temperature. This can't be right, I said. 2 months ago she was paying her own bills and organizing a library fundraiser. He gave me a professional smile. Dementia can accelerate quickly at your mother's age. Mr. Harrison, sometimes the decline appears sudden, maybe, but I left that conversation with a feeling I couldn't file away. Still, I kept showing up 3 times a week. I sat with her even when she spoke in fragments, even when she asked me where Mr. Harrison was, even when she looked at me as if I was a stranger who'd wandered into her living room. I held her hand. I told her about Emma's work. I read her the newspaper. I described the volunteer projects I was doing just to keep my voice steady in the room. Glenn visited, too technically, but his visits had a rhythm. In, out, watch checking, phone buzzing, like he was stopping by a property he managed. Not his mother. So, when he called me that morning with a fake soft voice and a sharp threat about the will, I finally stopped trying to talk myself out of the obvious. This wasn't grief. This was a play. I called Maple Grove immediately, after a long hold and a rushed transfer. A staff member picked up. I'm calling about my mother, I said, forcing my voice to stay even. Helen Harrison. I was told she passed away last night. There was a pause. Keyboard clicks. I'm sorry, sir, the woman said slowly. I don't have any record of that. Let me check. My throat tightened. Seconds passed like minutes. She returned. Mr. Harrison, your mother is alive. She's in the dining room right now, having breakfast. Is everything okay? I sat down so fast the chair legs scraped the floor. Yes, I managed. Yes, thank you. Then, lower. Could you do me a favor? Don't mention this call. Especially not to my brother. Another pause, this time wary. I understand. I hung up and stared at the countertop, at the coffee spill drying in a crooked stain. Glenn had just told me my mother was dead and she was eating breakfast. I called Emma next. She answered, half asleep. Dad, it's not even 7 there. Your uncle said Grandma died, I said. He was lying. Maple Grove says she's alive. Silence snapped her awake. Dad, I heard her shift in bed. That's not just weird. That's criminal. If he's trying to move money around or isolate her, that's elder abuse. I think he's already doing it. I said, what are you going to do? I don't know yet. I admitted, and hated how true it was. But he said the funeral is Friday. 3 days. That feels like a deadline. After we hung up, I didn't drink any more coffee. I didn't turn on the news. I sat at my table and started making calls like my life depended on it, because maybe Mum's did. The first call was to a lawyer I'd worked with years ago on a contract dispute. Robert Chen. By the time I finished explaining, there was no warmth left in Robert's voice, only focus. Douglas, if Glenn has PIA and he's misrepresenting her status, moving assets, coercing care decisions, that crosses into serious territory, he said. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, potentially criminal. But the law runs on proof, not suspicion. What kind of proof? Financial records, medical records, witness statements, Roberts said. And you need to move carefully. If he senses pressure, he may hide what he's done or escalate. The word landed like a weight. Then Roberts said, you should also consider hiring an investigator. Someone who can quietly trace the money and relationships while we start the legal process. So I did, that afternoon. Sarah Mitchell came to my house, mid-40s, sharp eyes, dark hair streaked with grey as if stress had painted it on purpose. She didn't waste time with sympathy. She treated my story like a case file and my fear like data. How long has Glenn had PIA? She asked. Pen moving, 9 months, I said. Right before this sudden dementia diagnosis, and before that. She was completely capable, I said. Bridge club twice a week. Library volunteer. Paid her own bills. Corrected my pronunciation for fun. Sarah's face didn't change, but her eyes tightened slightly. I've seen this before. Give me 48 hours. I'll start with bank activity, property records, and the doctor. If anything looks off, it'll show up there. That evening, I drove to Maple Grove without warning anyone. Mom was in her room again. in the same chair by the window. The sun was gone. The glass reflected the room like a dim mirror. She looked smaller than I remembered from my childhood, but don't we all to our own children? Her hair had thinned. Her skin had softened into more lines. But tonight there was something else, something that made me lean in, less foggy, less vacant. Mum, I said quietly, pulling a chair close. It's Douglas. She turned her head slowly, for a heartbeat. Her eyes, those familiar brown eyes, seemed to sharpen, as if they'd caught on something recognizable. My breath caught. Then a nurse came in, cheerful and brisk, checking blood pressure and asking questions that had nothing to do with what I was watching. Whatever I thought I saw in Mom's face slipped away. I left in the snow with my mind sprinting ahead of my body. If Glenn was willing to lie about her death, what else was he willing to do? A fake funeral, a manufactured timeline, a story designed to make everyone stop asking questions while he moved money around behind closed doors. Audacious, ridiculous, and yet frighteningly possible. Sarah called the next morning. Her voice was all business. Douglas, sit down. I'm sitting, I lied, and then lowered myself into the chair anyway. In the last 8 months, she said, Glenn has transferred roughly $280,000 from your mother's accounts into his own. My jaw went tight. He also sold the Muskoka cottage, she continued, but not directly to an individual. It went to a numbered company. I'm still peeling that onion, but it's likely connected to him. My hands went cold. And there's more, she said. Your mother's credit cards, multiple cash advances, irregular spending patterns. I stared at the table as if numbers might appear there. Then Sarah dropped the last piece. Dr. James Whitmore, the physician who signed off on the dementia diagnosis, has a long history with your brother. Same university cohort. Friends for decades. There are photos of them together. Events, reunions, you name it. My stomach turned. So the diagnosis could have been arranged, I said, or assisted. Sarah replied, if she's being over-medicated, sedatives, antipsychotics that can mimic cognitive collapse, especially in older adults. I'm requesting her medical records, but that takes time. Meanwhile, go see her. Document everything. And if your brother talks, record it. Ontario is one-party consent. My mind latched onto the practical steps because the alternative was panic. Okay, I said. Okay. That afternoon, I returned to Maple Grove. This time, Mum's room was empty. A nurse I didn't recognize was stripping the bed, humming under her breath. Where is my mother? I asked, and couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. Oh, Mr. Harrison, she said casually. Your brother took her out for a drive. Said she needed fresh air. My blood chilled. When? About an hour ago. I practically ran to the parking lot. Glenn's black Mercedes was gone. I called him. No answer. Again. Voicemail. Again. No answer. 3 hours later, the car finally rolled back in. Glenn got out first, straightening his coat. Then he went around to the passenger side and half-lifted, half-guided Mom out like she was a fragile package. She shuffled, exhausted, her head bobbing slightly as if it was too heavy for her neck. I was waiting in the hallway when they came in. Glenn's eyes snapped to mine. Douglas, he said, already irritated. What are you doing here? You told me she died yesterday, I said. My voice sounded calm, which surprised me. Yet here she is. He actually laughed one short burst, like I'd accused him of parking in the wrong spot. Oh, that. He waved a hand. I meant to call you back. There was confusion. She had an episode. You know how it is. No, I said. I don't know how it is. Where did you take her? Out, he said. A drive. She looks like she can barely stand. His expression hardened. The mask dropped. Back off, Douglas, he said lowly. I'm her power of attorney. I decide what's best. Not you. You're not her doctor, I said. You're not her guardian angel. You want to challenge it, he cut in. Get a lawyer. Then he brushed past me, steering Mom into her room and speaking to her in a voice too quiet to catch. When he came back out, he didn't even look at me. He just walked away. I was halfway to my car when my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I hesitated. Something in my chest told me to answer. Hello. Nothing. Just air. Then dash so faint I almost thought it was static. A woman's voice, strained and whisper thin. Douglas. My skin prickled. Who is this? Douglas, the voice repeated. Listen carefully. My breath stopped. It sounded like my mother. I stared at the screen. Blocked number. I don't have much time, the voice whispered. Come to my room tonight. After 10. Make sure Glenn isn't there, Mum. I croaked. Don't tell anyone you got this call, she said. Not yet. The line cut. I stood in the falling snow, phone pressed to my ear, feeling like reality had split into two versions and I was standing in the scene. It made no sense. Mom could barely speak, some days could barely form a complete sentence, and yet that voice had been clear in a way I hadn't heard in months. Not confused, controlled. That night, I sat in my car down the street from Maple Grove, watching the windows like I was staking out a crime scene. Glenn's Mercedes never returned. After 10, the building went quiet in the way institutions do. Lights dimmed, movements reduced to essential routines. I used my entry code at the side door and walked the whole way like a man moving through a dream he didn't trust. Mom's room was dark except for the small lamp by her bed. She was sitting upright, blanket pulled to her waist. When I stepped inside, she looked directly at me. Not past me. At me. Close the door, she said. It wasn't a mumble. It wasn't a foggy question. It was my mother's real voice, steady, firm, unmistakably hers. My hands started shaking as I shut the door. Mom, I whispered. Are you okay? What's going on? She patted the edge of the bed, the way she used to when I was a boy and had done something foolish but forgivable. Sit down, sweetheart, she said. We need to talk. And we need to do it quickly. I sat, stunned. How? You've been pretending, she said, and there was the smallest hint of amusement. The old Helen Harrison sparked. My mouth fell open. Pretending. She reached for my hand. Her grip was strong, steady, nothing like the limp fingers I'd held for months. I'm 85, Douglas, she said quietly. I've had time to think about life, about what happens when I'm not here to keep certain people honest. I stared at her. So the dementia, I let them believe it, she said. At first it was a way to buy time. Then it became a test, I repeated, as if saying it would make it less impossible. When Glenn pushed for power of attorney, she said, I saw an opportunity to learn who he really was, who you both were when you thought I had nothing left to offer you. My throat tightened. Mom, why would you do that? Her eyes softened, but her voice didn't waver. Because I needed to know who would show up for me when I couldn't give anything back, she said. Who would sit in a room with a woman who couldn't remember their name and still treat her like she mattered. I couldn't speak, she went on. Before Glenn ever signed a document, I met with my own lawyer. Someone he doesn't know. Most of what I own is already protected in a trust he can't touch. The accounts Glenn has been playing with, I left those on purpose. Just enough rope to see what he'd do with it. My head spun. All those months, I whispered. You watched him. I watched, she said. And I watched you too. Her thumb pressed gently against my knuckles. And you came, she said, 3 times a week. You held my hand. You talked to me like I was still me. Her voice trembled at the end, not with weakness, but with emotion. She was finally allowing herself to show. And now, she added, leaning closer, we're going to finish what we started. Because Glenn thinks he's already won. Send the next section when you're ready. And I'll continue from here with the same flow and upgraded tension. You talked to me, Mom continued, her voice soft but steady, even when I pretended I didn't know who you were. The tears hit before I could stop them. All the visits, all the hollow stares, all the drive home in the snow, convincing myself I was doing the right thing even if she wasn't really there anymore. Of course I came, I said, wiping my face with the back of my hand like a kid. You're my mother. Mom's expression changed, sadness edged with something harder. But Glenn, she shook her head slowly. Glenn didn't just fail, Douglas. He showed me a side of himself I didn't want to believe existed. I leaned in. What do you mean? I've been collecting proof, she said. Every time he tried to bully me into signing something. Every time he got angry when I couldn't understand. Every time he took things from this room because he assumed I'd forget. My stomach tightened. You recorded him. She nodded. Audio, notes, dates, times, and the money. Yes, the 280,000. That was from the accounts I left exposed on purpose. I wanted to see what he'd do if he thought no one was watching. The air felt suddenly thin. Mom, I said. Glenn called me and told me you were dead. He's planning a funeral for Friday. I know, she replied, like she'd already mourned the shock I was living in. He told me during that drive today. He said I was going to have a little accident soon, that I'd pass peacefully. He wanted me to sign transfer papers first. When I refused, he got desperate. A pulse of anger went through me so fast it turned into fear. This is insane, I said. It's dangerous. "We call the police right now." "No," she said firmly. "Not like that." I stared at her. "Why not?" "Because we do it properly," she said. "With a plan. And with evidence that can't be explained away." Then she added something that made my jaw drop. "Robert Chen is already involved," she said. "He's been my lawyer, too, for the last month." My mind flashed back to my call with Robert, how quickly he'd shifted into tactical mode. Now it made sense. Mom squeezed my hand. "I need you to trust me, Douglas. Can you do that?" My throat tightened again, but this time with something like relief. "Always," I said, "over the next 48 hours. Everything moved with quiet precision. Robert coordinated with police carefully, discreetly. Not a dramatic raid. Not a scene that Glenn could later paint as family conflict. The goal was to catch him doing what he'd already been doing, exploiting his power. Stealing, coercing, and drugging. Sarah Mitchell stayed on the financial trail, building a clean record of transfers, asset movements, and the Muskoka sale. Robert arranged for motions to freeze what could be frozen and to preserve records before they disappeared at Maple Grove. A small circle of staff agreed to help people who'd been uneasy for months but didn't know what to do without stepping into a legal mess. We didn't tell everyone, only the ones we could trust. Hidden cameras went into Mom's room, tiny, unobtrusive, positioned to capture the door, her bedside table, and the chair by the window where Glenn always hovered when he thought no one was listening, and Mom God. My mother was good, kept acting exactly the way Glenn expected, vacant, confused, harmless, the perfect victim. Glenn showed up 2 more times. The first visit, he came with paperwork and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He set documents on her tray like he was handing her a menu. "Just sign here, Mom," he said, voice tight. "We're doing this to make things easier." Mom blinked slowly, then scribbled something shaky and unreadable. Glenn's jaw worked. "No, not like that. Sign it properly." Mom stared at the page as if it were written in another language. Is this for school?" she mumbled. I watched the footage later and felt my hands curl into fists. Glenn leaned closer, his patience cracking. "Mom," he hissed through his teeth. "Stop playing games." She just blinked again, serenely confused. The second visit Thursday night was worse. Glenn came late, when staffing was thinner. He closed the door and moved like someone who'd rehearsed what he was about to do. He pulled out a syringe and told Mom it was medication to help her sleep. I wasn't in the room. I was watching remotely with Robert and an officer positioned down the hall. Even seeing it on a screen made me nauseated. Mom played her part, trembling and docile. She let him get close, let him think he had control. He spoke to her like he owned her. "Tomorrow," he said, smoothing her hair, "tomorrow you'll finally be at peace. No more suffering." Afterward, the substance was recovered and tested. It wasn't routine medication. It was an extreme sedative, dose dangerous enough that the officer with us went quiet when he read the result. Glenn wasn't just stealing, he was preparing to erase the witness. Friday arrived like a punch. Glenn had booked Thornhill Funeral Home. He'd sent messages, called relatives, posted a polished obituary full of syrupy lines about a long illness and a beloved mother. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out with condolences. I played along because we had to. Every thank you tasted like metal in my mouth. Anna flew in that morning, eyes red from travel and fury. "This is sick," she whispered as we walked toward the chapel. "He's holding a funeral for someone who's alive." "I know," I said. "Stay close. Whatever happens, don't react until I do." The funeral home was packed. Flowers everywhere. A large framed photo of Mom from 20 years earlier, bright-eyed, smiling, very much alive, stood at the front like a cruel joke. There was a casket to closed, of course. Glenn had told people it was best that way. He sat across the aisle with Patricia and the kids, his face composed into the expression of a grieving son. Patricia kept touching his arm like she was trying to keep him together. The children looked genuinely heartbroken. At exactly 2 p.m. Glenn stood. He walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began, voice smooth and solemn. "We're here today to honor the life of Helen Margaret Harrison," he said. "Born February 14, 1939. And," he paused for effect, "passed January 7, 2025. He spoke about her teaching career, her kindness, her bravery. Then he pivoted. Like a salesman easing into the pitch. In her final months," he said, "she trusted me to handle her affairs. She knew I'd protect her interests." My stomach churned. He looked out over the crowd. eyes glossy with fake emotion. She always knew I was the responsible one, and then he said it like he was sealing the deal in front of witnesses. She wanted me to have the house, the cottage, everything she worked for. I stood up. Every head turned. Glenn froze mid-breath. That's interesting, I said, my voice louder than I expected. Want to tell everyone where Mom actually is right now? A ripple of confusion moved through the room like wind through tall grass. Glenn's face drained. Douglas, sit down. This isn't the time. I took one step into the aisle. Where's the body? Glenn. His mouth opened, then closed. She's being cremated. You know that, really? I said, because I called. They don't have her. Patricia's hand tightened on his sleeve. Glenn, what is he talking about? Before Glenn could answer, the doors at the back of the chapel opened, and there she was. My mother walking slowly with a walker, yes, but upright, present, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Two uniformed officers stepped in behind her. The room erupted. Gasps, sobs. Someone actually screamed. Glenn's daughter burst into tears, half relief, half terror. Mom moved down the aisle at her own pace. No drama, no trembling helplessness. Just quiet authority. She stopped in front of Glenn. Double quotes. Hello, son, she said clearly. I'm not dead. Then her voice hardened. But your inheritance is... Glenn's lips moved with no sound. Like his brain couldn't find the right lie fast enough. Mom, he finally stammered. You're confused. You're sick. This is a mistake. I'm not confused, she said. I've been recording you for months. The threats, the theft, the coercion, the paperwork you tried to force me to sign, the money you took because you thought I was already gone. She turned to the crowd, voice breaking just slightly. I'm sorry to deceive all of you, she said, but I needed to know the truth. I needed to see what someone would do to me when they believed I was helpless. One of the officers stepped forward. Glenn Harrison, he said, you are under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, theft over $5,000, and attempted probate fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Glenn did the one thing guilty people always think will work. He ran. He made it 3 steps before an officer tackled him. The sound of his body hitting the carpeted floor was sickeningly loud. Handcuffs clicked. His children sobbed. Patricia stood frozen, her face blank with shock. As they pulled him up, Glenn twisted toward Mom, shouting, I'm your son. You can't do this to me. I needed that money. Mom's tears fell, then quiet, unstoppable, but her voice didn't shake. You were my son, she said. And you stopped being my child the moment you decided my life was worth less than my bank account. They led him out. The chapel stayed silent long after the doors closed. The legal aftermath took months. Glenn tried to paint it as a misunderstanding at first, claimed Mom was incompetent, claimed he was helping, claimed I was manipulating her. None of it survived contact with evidence. There were videos of him pushing documents at her, snapping when she didn't comply, audio recordings of him pressuring and threatening, financial records showing the transfers. Sarah traced the numbered company linked to the cottage sale. And Dr. Whitmore, the smooth doctor, eventually testified too, after being offered immunity in exchange for the truth. He admitted Glenn had leaned on him for prescriptions and language that would support the dementia narrative without proper evaluation. Glenn pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, ordered to repay the $280,000, and hit with heavy fines. His real estate license was revoked permanently. Patricia divorced him and got full custody. The kids were devastated, not just because they lost a father in the daily sense, but because they learned who he really was. And I did what we could to stay close to them. Not as a replacement, just as something steady in the wreckage. Dr. Whitmore lost his medical license. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario didn't treat I was pressured as an excuse for endangering an elderly patient. As for Mom, she sold the big house and moved into a small condo near mine. She was finished with lawns and snow shovels and the loneliness of too much space. We had dinner twice a week. Real dinners, conversation, laughter, arguments about politics and whether my cooking was acceptable, which was her way of saying she was happy, and she volunteered again, this time with an elder abuse prevention group, telling her story to help people recognize warning signs, sudden power changes, isolation, abrupt medication shifts, mysterious cognitive decline, unexplained transfers, relatives who control access and information. We also created the Helen Harrison Elder Protection Fund using part of the recovered money, legal help for seniors facing financial abuse. plus education about what power of attorney actually means, and what it doesn't. About a year later, Mom and I sat on my back porch watching another Toronto snowfall. She had tea in both hands and a blanket around her shoulders like armor. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked quietly. "Testing us the way you did?" She stayed silent for a long time. "I regret that it was necessary," she said at last. "I regret that my own son could do what he did." Then she looked at me, eyes clear. "But I don't regret learning the truth. I needed to know who would love me when I had nothing left to offer." I swallowed. "You're the one who taught me integrity," I said. "You taught me that doing the right thing matters, especially when it costs you." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "And that's why you passed," she said. "Not because you visited, though you did, but because when you thought I was gone, when you thought you were getting nothing, you still fought to protect me." We sat there listening to the quiet snow landing on fences, on bare branches, on the world. Then Mom said something that still twists my chest when I remember it. "You know the saddest part?" "What?" "If Glenn had just asked," she said. "If he'd been honest about his financial problems, I would have helped him. Not endlessly, not blindly, but I would have helped. Instead, he chose theft. He chose to treat me like I was already dead. I didn't have an answer for that. So I did the only thing that felt real. I held her hand, because the lesson wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't about blood. It was about choice. Who shows up, who protects the vulnerable, who stands up when it would be easier to look away. Glenn made his choice, and I made mine, and thanks to an 85-year-old woman with a steel spine and a mind sharper than anyone gave her credit for, my mother got her life back while she was still alive to live it.